Greetings from Costa Rica, folks, and welcome to Real Estate Forum number 25. I'm Matt Rosenstiel, aka Costa Rica Matt, and today I want to address the 5 biggest threats that I see potentially impacting the Guanacaste, Costa Rica real estate market in the next 5 to 10 years. These are the forces that I see as potentially having the biggest negative potential impact on our market here in the near and medium term future. As always, my insight is based on 15 years of living and working here in Guanacaste, and my primary goal is to empower people like you to make good decisions about Costa Rica. If you like straightforward information about this country, do be sure to subscribe to my channel. Hit the notifications bell, please. Like, comment on my videos, anything that you want to do to participate. I'd greatly appreciate, because every Friday live at noon, I'll be presenting information on one or another critical aspect of Costa Rica real estate, and what could be more critical than the potential threats that could tank our market. These are the things that keep me awake at night as the father of 2 boys who's 100% dependent on putting food on the table through real estate sales. First and foremost, I want to talk about security, or rather a potential deterioration of security, as what I see as the biggest existential threat to Costa Rican real estate currently. Costa Rica is and has been the safest country in Central America for a while. However, that is definitely under threat because, yes, Central America is how cocaine gets from Colombia to the rest of the world. For a long time, Costa Rica's main issue with narco traffickers was that they were going up through the country to the United States of America. But there's also been a recent increase in the trend of narco traffickers in Colombia using Costa Rica as a jumping off point for shipments to Europe. So specifically, they have seen a large jump in crime in the Caribbean side of the country, Limon specifically, which is our largest Caribbean port, where everything can be shipped to Europe, including cocaine. And unfortunately, in 2022, Costa Rica had a record-breaking year for the national homicide rate per 100,000 people. The country saw a total of 656 murders in 2022. However, it's very important to understand that the vast majority of those, in fact, 421 of the 650 murders, were score settling between different drug dealers. So obviously, the security situation here is very much tied to that narco trafficking situation. Really, the situation isn't that threatening to US, Canadian, and European investors buying property here in Guanacaste, but I see the threat to the real estate market as real and present, because every single day anything can go wrong that will really change Costa Rica's public relations image as this island of security and stability. Let's talk about the second biggest threat, and this may not come as news to many of you, but I definitely see climate change as really a top possible factor affecting Guanacaste, and in fact, you could clearly say that a changing climate has already impacted Guanacaste's real estate market, and this is how it happened. In the 1900 to 1940 period, Guanacaste got perhaps 4 to 5 meters of average annual rainfall. At the turn of the century, simply put, we were getting an enormous amount of rain. This was a place on Earth that was much closer to rainforest than it is today. We started to see a decline in rainfall in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Whereas in 1900, 10, and 20, you had that 4 to 5 meters of rain per year as really your moving average. By 1980, you were down to just 2 meters of rain as that 20-year moving average. So there isn't a question as to whether the climate is or has changed in Guanacaste. I don't personally want to go into what I would consider to be the main causes of that. However, I do want to say that yes, Guanacaste dried out. And, for example, in 2014 and 15, when we had a couple of years of mega drought, all of a sudden there was not enough water in many coastal tourism communities to meet the demand for construction. By the way, there was also not enough water for many of the Costa Rican communities, and there were problems across the board. I just mean to talk about real estate, however, and this water shortage was enormously impactful. The Costa Rica government responded by passing water restrictions that really you hadn't seen in our area before. And specifically, they would no longer allow the local water suppliers, these asadas, to extend new water service for new construction in any area affected by this mega drought. They did a study, picked out which asadas they would no longer allow to issue these water letters, and you saw a paralysis on new construction in Playa Tamarindo and the areas affected by the drought from 2015 until I think 2018 or 19, really. Now that moratorium on new water service, that's just one example of climate change already affecting Guanacaste. But definitely I can see that in future years we will get more mega droughts. The government has built infrastructure to address this, but to be quite honest, the infrastructure doesn't bring water to every single tourism community, and there will be those that don't have water during the next mega drought. And second of all, yes, Guanacaste has forest fires. When somebody actually asked me recently whether I saw the wildfires in Hawaii potentially being copied and pasted to those in Guanacaste, really Guanacaste has annual fires in the hilly farm areas that people don't really take care of per se. There are still a ton of people here who burn their farm annually to clear it out. Clearing out brush by hand or any other technique would cost way more money than most of these rural, humble farmers could invest in their land. So fire is frequently the easiest way to just keep the brush down. Now, whether these fires can become more intense and prolonged and exacerbated by climate change, I'm 100% sure they can be. Excuse me. However, I feel that in many cases we've already seen forest fires annually that may be doing some of the work of clearing out this brush simply because Guanacaste is a place that does burn, or many sections of it. So the long story short is, I don't necessarily see fires changing dramatically just because they're so frequently used in the mountains here anyway, but definitely the possibility of drought as a result of climate change would be a huge one. Fire second, and third, we also do have the fact that red tide is exacerbated by climate change. The warming oceans increase the frequency and severity of those events. Yes, Guanacaste does see the red tide every now and then. Most recently was only a couple years ago. You might not have seen that on the news, but as another effect of climate change, I could absolutely see red tide impacting our real estate market in the future, especially as climate change rears its ugly head. A third threat that I see to the Guanacaste real estate market, and I do not mean to raise any alarm bells here, this is purely a future threat, are the government finances of Costa Rica. Right now, in 2023, the government's actually in a period of relative fiscal prosperity. You saw an enormous jump in the debt to GDP ratio in 2020, just like everywhere else in the world, as a side effect of the pandemic. However, right now, the growth in the national debt as compared to the GDP has been absolutely minimal over the last 2 years, showing that the government is spending a lot closer to what it's actually taking in. However, when I say that this is a threat to the Guanacaste real estate market, I'm saying this as a realist who looks at the overall picture in the world and a couple of factors that just can't be ignored. First, all of these Central American countries are perpetually in debt, just like the rich industrialized countries. The big difference here is that access to sources of financing, or rather the ability to just print your own money to make up that debt, is entirely different here. So whereas the US has a higher debt to GDP ratio than Costa Rica does, Costa Rica has about 63% of its GDP as debt. That represents $43 billion in debt. That is actually a lower ratio than in the US, but definitely it is a situation where the moment that Costa Rica cannot meet its debt obligations, it has not nearly the financial leverage that the United States does in order to quickly paper over the problem. And in fact, Costa Rica has to go to international lenders like the IMF, World Bank, or whoever is willing to pitch in whenever their numbers are not going to work. Like I said, currently the government's financial position is relatively calm, stable, and a happy situation. However, having lived here for 15 years, there have already been 2 or 3, depending on your definition of sort of a debt crisis, there have already been a couple debt crises while I've lived in Costa Rica. I am convinced that while the debt isn't getting any lower, there will eventually be moments where the government has to continue addressing financial crises. I am 100% certain that when there's another economic crisis, tax receipts will decline, government borrowing will have to accelerate, and you could easily see an attention-grabbing crisis, just like the last time I would say was really about 2020 during the pandemic, when all of a sudden there were headlines in both Costa Rica national news, but internationally, that the government was dealing with a debt problem. Now again, this could not actually be an enormous threat to I don't think the country is going to rip itself apart in a coming debt crisis. I don't plan on moving, or I don't think that this is going to create an enormous security situation. But like I said, we're talking about the threats to Guanacaste real estate. Based on my experience, I would guess that of the threats out there, a financial crisis in the next 5 to 10 years will be one of the things that reduces property values more so than anything else. The prices of real estate in Guanacaste are, in fact, my 4th biggest threat to the real estate market here. And rather than in the next 5 to 10 years, this is an ongoing issue that I think is affecting our market. Ever since we reopened the borders to international travelers at the end of the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic shutdown, you've seen this frenzy, a real accelerating bubble here in the Guanacaste real estate market, especially for those prime location, exclusive properties that put you in one of the communities that really grab headlines. I'm talking about prices in Tamarindo, Flamingo, Potrero, Playas del Coco as well. Anywhere that you saw a tourism hub that really attracted tons of foreigners, you saw prices just jump up an order of magnitude between 2021 and present day. I can already say that those prices are keeping people out of our real estate market and affecting the overall dynamic. I constantly email old people in my database, going back through and touching base and seeing if they're still interested in Costa Rica. And with an increasing frequency, people are writing me back and saying, prices have just become absolutely unfeasible for me compared to when I started looking at real estate 2 years ago. The final threat that I want to talk about to the Guanacaste, Costa Rica real estate market is not new, and in fact, this threat has been the source of most of the problems in the market to begin with. And I'm talking up here about the inexperienced, unethical realtors and agents operating in Guanacaste who completely misguide their clients, whose clients then have a bad experience and then lose their money in some cases, and then do nothing but report their experience to everybody else in the world. Remember, this is not an area where we have licensed real estate agents. Most importantly, though, just because somebody's wearing a shirt with a logo of a real estate company on it, this does not mean that they have the in-depth knowledge about a property, community, or anything related to it to really guide your investment decision. 2 of the top qualifications for any kind of real estate agent in Costa Rica, in my opinion, should be your experience living and working in a community. And second of all, yes, you should be looking for Spanish bilingual agents who actually can build their knowledge of a community over the years because they speak the language. Really, the 2 are related to each other. You would be shocked at just how little experience in real estate or even in Costa Rica that some of the agents have in Guanacaste. 30 years ago, a lot of the people running around just fast and loose trying to sell real estate, they were the origin of all of the horror stories that continue to make my job difficult. People approach me, they've heard that Guanacaste is filled with, thieving, lying, all kinds of words, realtors or agents, architects, everybody is just unethical, etc. And yes, this continues to be a threat today. I, in particular, think that now really what you need to be concerned about are whether or not the realtors you might be working with are experienced in the community that they live in. Some people arrive here and 6 months later or less are sitting behind the desk of a real estate brokerage offering to help guide people on their real estate decisions. And this threat continues to create the bad stories that everybody hears. So when you meet realtors in Guanacaste, do not hesitate to grill them on their experience and qualifications. If you're talking to somebody who's only been here for a couple years, feel free to ask for a different realtor who's been here longer. The person who has only been here for 2 years has not seen the drought. They haven't seen a real economic crisis. And really, they don't have the in-depth understanding of what makes a community tick. You need someone with experience. You need somebody who also speaks Spanish, because that bilingualism will give them the in-depth, profound understanding of what's actually going on in a community and the threats that could affect your property in the future. Like I said at the beginning, be sure to subscribe by clicking here, folks. It's always a pleasure. See you next Friday.